Starting to record, sorry. All right, so I'm starting the recording.
Nothing previous can be considered interesting because it's not recorded, other than the notes.
Well, what we said, yeah, I mean, what we did before was we were all writing everything down, writing our ideas about what we want to explore down. So that seems good.
So anyone looking at this recording after the fact should definitely make a point of going to the notes.
Yeah.
Super. And I didn't put this into chat, but I'll say it out loud. When we talk about decisions, the group here is the DGov group. And so when we say what manner of decision, what kind of decision, or class of decision, or universe of decisions, I am predisposed to think of, well, governance decisions, right? The kinds of decisions that have to be made through a governance process, the kind of decision that, affects everybody, including those who voted against it, the kinds of decisions that take place in a collective. And that takes my mind immediately then to, okay, great, the community, whoever they are, have decided, whatever that means, to do X, but deciding to do it is different from doing it. We can decide we want low inflation and full employment and generous welfare state and no national debt. We can vote in favor of all those things, but so what? Can they all be reconciled with one another, and who do we trust to carry that out? Now that may be going beyond the realm of decisions and data, but it is the next thing. And it could be that there's metadata or meta decisions. Do we want to sit around as a collective and vote for policies or make, quote unquote, make decisions that cannot be carried out, that are unrealistic or unworkable or incompatible?
To me, that also relates to data, right? So as we're having the conversation, having good information about what are the resources at our disposal and what are the implementation methods at our disposal and what groups similar to ours have done. So to me that, it's a circular thing, right? Let's say we're trying to clean up the river, we're trying to decide whether to build a community center in our neighborhood, and here's some data about how that's been done, what it's going to cost. To me, that all loops back, and then the questions that you're asking are kind of more about to me, they belong more in the proposal process. Writing a proposal for doing something without a methodology to do it, and I think I think that's one of the things broken about our system, right? It's like Brexit, yes, okay, now what, right? That wasn't a good proposal. The proposal itself was broken, not the data was broken too, and everything else was broken, but except for the voting system, but because people could go and press a button, but the data was also broken around that. Like even when the proposal was on the table, people weren't getting good data. So all of that is, so it is hard to separate those out, but to me, what you're talking about is also news and data. Like, how can we approve a proposal without knowing what it's going to cost us? I mean, we don't do that in our personal lives and, small groups, families. I mean, sometimes we do, but like, what's it going to take to change democracy? We've all decided we want to do it, and we have no idea what it's going to take. But, that's another question.
Griff is nodding.
Yeah, I think the evidence
deeply
is,
thoughtful. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I think the evidence, you asked the question, do we vote for things we can't do? The evidence is frequently, regularly, in all sorts of ways and places, we wave the flag. There was a thing I read about a kindergarten class asked to sex little chicks. And of course, how do you sex a little chick? The last question offering was, we could vote on it, right? And
what was modern. The question?
The topic of you have to look at baby chicks, little baby chickens, and figure out by looking at them, are they boys or girls? Because
okay.
That's what sexing a chick is.
Okay.
Possible.
source of this
For
Reader's
clarifying.
Digest. Yeah, this
Some
was
people
from,
are into poultry. There's nothing wrong with that, Lauren.
Pretty important.
Yeah, this came from a Reader's Digest.
Let's give Lauren a moment to shift gears here, Michael. We lost her.
Yeah, wisdom from the Reader's Digest bylines from
Yes.
about 40 years ago. Just because you can vote on something doesn't mean you know what you're talking about.
Right. And there's a kind of aura or air of legitimacy around a vote that may or may not have anything to do. It's like, we could vote on it. No, some things are facts. They're not susceptible to a vote.
Yeah,
We have opinions about facts. We can't, the voting doesn't change a real world fact.
Richard Feynman and the explosion of the space shuttle and his analysis that reality is not compromised by opinions and presentation. It's a matter of science. And the
Right.
problem with the O-rings was PowerPoint. PowerPoint had basically become the structure of information processing in that organization, more or less.
It's a terrifying thought.
And nature is not fooled, was basically his point. Don't mess with stuff that's based in reality.
Somebody once said reality is what is still there after you stop believing in it.
Yeah. The ground
Unlike,
will
say,
hit you.
fiat currencies. Lauren's looking very thoughtful. Come on, Lauren.
So I have this picture of a baby chick, but I'm still not entirely clear what wisdom that shows us about voting.
Two things. One is knowing the gender or the sex of a chicken is important in terms of decisions you make as in animal husbandry.
Okay.
And so it's actually a pretty important question for people who have that question in front of them, not me, ever. And secondly, just because you can vote on here's a chick, is it a boy or a girl? Let's vote. It's like, how does that help? It is, I say it should be a boy because boys are cool. It's like, what? No, you're not. The vote doesn't change the gender of the animal. It came with the gender when it was conceived.
And
Voting is not the right way to. It's not the right mechanism.
And you have a 6-year-old venturing this mechanism in a class as a strategy for further sense making. Let us vote on something we don't know anything about, because she's learned that by the age of 6 or 7. I say she, just in a non-denominative gender. But it's like we already teach ourselves not to think very quickly.
Or observe, right? Because what the group thinks is more important than what reality is. And by the way, that's I firmly believe that all organisms evolve in response to the most important aspects of their environment. So, penguins for the water and the cold, birds for flying, in most cases, not all. Humans are evolved for the context of other humans. The other humans around you are more important to your survival even than the temperature. No, the temperature is not important. And that's part of why we have enormous brains and complex communication ability and an elaborate mechanisms for deceiving each other and ourselves. And certainly we have a tremendous fear of, most of us have a fear of being ostracized or embarrassed or losing social status. And many of us strive desperately for social status. In part, I would claim, if you believe evolutionary psychology, that high status is associated with more resources and greater safety and greater health. And a loss of status or a lack of status is highly correlated with fewer resources and greater health issues. And I could go on. So if we're, as a group, making decisions to the extent the group's decisions affect me personally, am I really even incentivized to vote or participate in decision making in a way that, quote, benefits the group as a whole, unquote, or am I predisposed to do it in a way that benefits me personally? There's something about the 7:26 Pacific time that is deeply attractive to Kevin and Martin, because they've chosen now to join us.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Hello. Hi. Sorry
Greetings and
Hi,
to
welcome,
salutations.
Kevin. I think you're new here, so welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I am new.
But, yeah,
Super.
the topic is, yeah,
yeah.
cool.
Oh.
Yeah,
right,
we're talking
that's-
about news and governance. I mean, I would say that this is, I
Yeah.
mean, one of the questions that's intrinsic in what you're asking, Thomas, and is one of the questions that also came up on the list is how do we, when we're talking about news and information, guide a community or a group of people towards information that is based in reality and not just in perspectives, and what is the right balance of that, and how do we, again, I think it goes back to what people asked on this thing, like how do we know that some data is good data, and how do we create systems, because right now we've created, I mean, again, as Lauren quoted me on Twitter this week, we've created these really intelligent feeds that know how to feed us data in a way that we like, and that optimizes for us to click on some buttons and buy some stuff. Now I'm really careful about what I say so that I'm not going to be cursing in social media, but how could we do that for reputational data, and where would that come from? Like, how would we even know? Like, right now there's all these experts who the hell nominated them an expert? Like, how'd that even happen? So
Right.
how do we
He's got lots of
optimize
views
that?
on YouTube. He must know something.
It's not even the
So,
users on
but before
YouTube.
we-
He's being interviewed by the official sources as an expert.
Right. Yeah. Self-proclaimed expert. So I'm going to put a pin in expertise and greet Martin and greet Kevin and say welcome, and ask if either Ruben or Victor, who have been silent and I believe processing deeply, if either Victor or Ruben would like to do a recap of what we've said so far from their perspective, as a way of onboarding Kevin and Martin, and also a chance for us to step back and reflect from the conversation so far. Ruben's looking like he's maybe willing to take up the challenge.
I'll try to give a recap.
Outstanding.
So yeah, we're talking about news and data, and we have just written out a couple of questions that everybody has on their perspectives on news and data and how it influences decision making. And right now, I was still trying to get exactly what Grace was meaning with the expertise and reputation linked to, the individual or the organization that delivers the data to make decisions on. That's just my personal question. How can you elaborate more on that? Because I did not get it 100% on the expertise area.
And does Lauren's an avid note taker.
I didn't hear your question because I was busy taking notes.
Yeah, Ruben, did you want to restate your question?
Yeah.
And
So about
Lauren or Michael Linton to answer.
Yeah, about the expertise and reputation linked to, I guess, the ones that generate the data, right? Is that how you explained it?
Wait, can I ask a short question? Yes, because I posted some questions in the chat, but I was confused. It's the Google Doc, because I'm seeing the Google Doc coming up again. Is that the place where you can post questions that will be addressed in the talk, or like is it notes from what has been said by people? I wasn't sure about that.
My sense is that a Google Doc that is titled DGov Call News and Information, that it's more or less Grace's notes and other folks' notes on what we've said as we've been saying it.
Okay, good. Yeah. Okay, then it's good that I posted the questions here in the chat, and I can also state them later after the recap.
Yeah, there's a
Great.
forum, so you can also always put more notes in the forum, or ifs, ands, buts, whatever you want.
Right. I'm not sure if Martin and Kevin feel more or less oriented now. Let me. Martin's smiling.
Yeah, I've learned some things about. There's a Google Doc, and yeah, you're perhaps in some sort of process of gathering a question or two, and there's a process there to help sort of gather the topics to explore on, or I don't know. No, not
Close
really.
Okay.
Okay, but the
Ben,
general
you are exactly where the rest of us are. Well done.
Okay, thank you. It might take
Victor.
me an hour to digest what the
There's a lot here.
Victor's introduction means, but this subject is extremely important, and the things I've heard so far: reputation. How do you attest for that? How many accounts can somebody have, and anonymity versus and so on, in order to build some sort of people-centric transicity? No, I don't. Yes, yes, to sort of build people into the network. Actually, I think if we're talking about trust between people rather than perhaps algorithmic quality, but something like that. Anyway, those are all in play somewhere.
Awesome, Martin. Thank you. You are more up to speed than you realize. And Victor, you had your hand up.
Yeah, like I wanted to add maybe to what Ruben says is that I also perceived it slightly in the context of the post-truth issue. You know, like the idea that that if there's no trust in sort of certain channels of like that this is factual or like correct information, and people come with sort of alternative facts, and how do you navigate around these issues in a system of decentralized governance, and also data aided governance. Is that correct? Because this is how I understood it.
Okay, Griff is reacting very positively to Victor, or something.
Data governance. Common Stack actually has a Medium article talking about computer-aided governance, which is exactly this, where you take the data that you can and then analyze it to do predictive modeling on governance decisions. And but I kind of want to go back to what Grace was saying before we did the recap.
Reputation and so on.
Yeah, reputation and expertise. And I think it's important that there's expertise is important, but also aligned incentives and effectively skin in the game is also important, and making sure that, guess what? This is the chief scientist, that is like the best expert here, but guess what? He's funded by Monsanto and and he thinks that heirloom seeds or ancestral seeds are like a bad idea. Well, he's got his skin. He might be an expert, but he's got mixed incentives, and
at the very least, right?
Yeah, and so it's more complicated than just who's an expert. It's, I think Victor added this, like, who can you trust and why can you trust them, and is that trust transparent? I think for a a decentralized governance situation, it's not only important that there is trust, but that trust can be validated. Yeah, Grace.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a really interesting system. Well, she didn't actually develop it, an interesting concept by Anna Delito at the Open University and outside of London. And she had this concept that in a system like that, you could have people attesting to different facts. So it's like, yeah, here's the article, here's the person's degrees or reputation. And then people could say, well, that person is funded by Monsanto. I did the research. And that's really similar, I think, that, and I want to also address what you said, incentives. If Diversify did that, right, with the Nectar DAO people, right, they had this whole system of whether to list things on an exchange. And they had a list of, I think it was 20 qualifications. And then people like absolutely volunteered with huge amounts of documentations and lawyers, and did they pass this qualify? And it became a very intelligent discussion because they laid out here's the 20 criteria. Does this coin meet the criteria? And traders on the exchange had really lively conversations, and there were arguments and counter arguments. And so if you
if you encourage that kind of behavior and create threaded chats in a way that maybe you can upvote people's intent, you know, like this is qualified, this isn't qualified, and you can really read, hey, I know that guy, or I know that guy is funded by Monsanto. People are able to sort through that information, and there's good evidence that people do that with, in this case, with Diversify, no incentivization other than, you know, knowing that they like each other. There was a little bit of tokenization of that, but it wasn't mostly. The amount of information people gave compared to the amount of reward really not aligned. It was just being part of something. And I think people are hungry for that. So I think about incentivization. It's like, how much time do we spend on Facebook? Our main incentive is to feel part of a community. And wouldn't you rather feel part of a community where people are honored and people are giving you better information? We're all desperate for that right now. Everybody's desperate for, like, who the hell do I believe? That's huge incentive. Like, just having a clue is, like, for me, yeah, just to have a clue would be a big incentive. I saw Victor saying something.
Yes, well, it is interesting that the expertise and Monsanto example was mentioned, because it also immediately made me think about the sort of the same type of argumentation being used in a context where I can stand a lot less behind it, namely that, like, an actually pretty large percentage of the population would sort of have the same argument about, like, the treatment or, like, vaccination against COVID-19, and sort of the official things about it, and the World Health Organization being sort of coming from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, of which, like, a large percentage of the population believes that they want to depopulate the world. And this is, I think, like, exemplary of the distrust that sort of people have in sort of certain official authorities, and even maybe the scientific endeavor as a whole, which makes it quite crucial, I think, how these kind of things can be organized in a way that maybe also prevents these type of distrust. But it's something that crossed my mind.
And if I can add, sorry, go ahead,
Go,
Thomas.
Kevin, go.
Just really quickly, just really quickly, I could add that I think there's two layers of this, right? Because we also live in a world where we have a ton of availability of public on-chain information and data of activity, right? So, like, there's the on-chain layer data, which is more kind of like objective truth of a certain, like, address's actions and a certain address and how they're interacting with the chain and activity around that. And then the more subjective layer, right? That's also kind of like pulling in external information or external reputation from different sources, that has to be more verified kind of like by a broader community of stakeholders. But, you know, I think something really interesting to look at is kind of like the interaction of those two. And for specific decisions and, like, decision-making processes, what's more relevant? You know, is someone's qualifications in the real world or how they behaved on a certain forum more relevant to that specific decision than their actions and interactions with for example, Compound DeFi smart contract or with a Maker smart contract? No, maybe, you know, their activity within the on-chain ecosystem is much more relevant to a specific decision, and their expertise really should be proven with, you know, based on the liquidity that they're adding to synthetics, right, or based on, like, the CDPs that they've issued. So there's kind of like a broad categorization of, like, different activities and reputations, and how, you know, you really have to consider different stakeholders for these decisions.
There's something I wanted to share on screen if I could. Grace, would you be willing to permit screen sharing?
Yeah, let me do that. The other thing I would say about that is that's really insightful. I just wanted to add to what Kevin said. Like, in the real world, you can prove that, I'm sorry, I'm looking for the thing, but in the real world, you can prove somebody's been right over time. Like, this scientist has been proven correct. He's not just a scientist, but his studies have shown to be correct. Okay, you should have sharing, you know, so whether it's on chain or off chain, there is that, like, there's a difference between having a degree and having your studies been proven correct in the real world.
Right. Ray Dalio talks about that, Grace, extensively in how he's been running an organization that he founded some years ago, that people's decision rights in the group are weighted by how accurate their past predictions have been on that topic. Although that in turn brings rise to the question of, well, how can you, which topic is relevant? And What does it mean to have a good past prediction? So what I've got up here is a data model that I banged together for how an entity, let's say me, might make an attestation about, say, Grace. So the attestation is by Thomas about Grace, and the attestation contains certain attributes and attribute related to an attribute type. So her attribute is trustworthy, according to me. And I would rate that like, 4 out of 5 or 9 out of 10 or something. But then would I guarantee that? And would I say trustworthy in a domain, or is it some sort of blanket thing because I just happen to like her? And even if I make that statement, if no one relies on it for a decision, then that attestation and even a guarantee about the attestation is, moot. It's only when a person makes a decision that relies on, hey, I said, Thomas, you said Grace was trustworthy, and I lent her $10,000, and she never paid it back, and so you owe me because I trusted you, and I only guaranteed that to the tune of $10. Then okay, great, I'm out my $10 because I misstated, or my attestation didn't hold up over time. But if I make attestations without guarantees and you rely on them, well, that's kind of on you. If people make decisions on attestations that do have guarantees, now I've put skin in the game when I made the attestation, and you put skin in the game by making a decision that relied on it. I know it's a complex model and most people aren't trained to think in ER diagrams, so.
It just sounds like that. I mean, it sounds logical, right? Like, it's like that's how we really do things, isn't it? I mean, we don't have diagrams in our head, but isn't that how it really goes?
Yes, and there's a game people play sometimes where they say, oh, I made a decision 3 years ago, and I relied on this fact over here that that was in the public domain. And so the person who made that statement, I claim I relied on it, and now they owe me something because it all fell apart. My dad was actually named in a lawsuit once because somebody claimed that he'd said something that discouraged them from a course of action that they should have taken, and so he owed them the money they didn't make because they didn't do the thing that they were going to do, when his statement somehow had a chilling effect on their actions. So anyway, I don't know if anyone wants a screenshot of that, but I'm going to take that back down so we can see each other's faces better.
Put one in the document.
Great.
That's
So it's what I was trying to capture in that model that I just had up on screen was the idea that it's one thing to believe something about somebody. It's another thing to attest publicly that you believe it to be true. And it's yet another thing to offer any sort of guarantee or a claim of accuracy that you can come after me. Yeah, if I said that this is a true statement and then it later turns out, no, you said you taught this guy something and you gave him a certificate of graduation from your course, and there's no evidence he ever actually attended, and he's demonstrated none of the skills you claimed he had. And so I'm going to come after you for offering a certificate that I relied on to make a hiring decision or to, select a contractor or what have you. This is routinely happens in construction contracting. You have subcontractors who represent themselves as having skills and abilities that they are unable to actually display in the workplace once you give them access to your construction site and materials. And it's quite dreadful. Michael's smiling. He has hired subcontractors at some point, I suspect.
Life's full of such things.
Indeed, indeed. And conversely, a reputation of goodness is worth an enormous amount. That's why we build these reputation systems and why people game reputation systems. Anyway, I wanted to add one more thought, and I'll go back to facilitating. But when we were talking about post-truth and the sort of the destruction of the elites, the lack of trust, the erosion of trust in the media, has, I would claim, largely been happening roughly in a pace with the demonstrated lack of trustworthiness by a lot of media. That there's been a polarization, a hackification, I don't mean in a good way, a race to the bottom in quality with regard to journalism. And we've seen, front page articles that have to get denied and walked back within a matter of days. And the impact of the original article happened to be exactly in line with the imputed political preferences of the paper and or of the authors. There was a storied, in some circles, study that was done on whether liberals or conservatives were more aligned with authoritarian thinking styles. And both of the researchers and all of their peer reviewers missed the fact that they had inverted a sign and that a correlation in one direction was actually the opposite correlation. But because the correlation they thought they saw comported with their political preferences, they didn't question it. And it took a hostile peer reviewer to point out that their data contradicted their conclusions. But this was after it had been repeated and retweeted thousands of times because it proves the other side is authoritarian, darn it. And so we have a great hunger, apparently, for data that confirms what we already think. And I think it would be foolish and dangerous to put too much trust into people in positions of authority in the data stream. Journalistic institutions, if they haven't demonstrated in some way that's tangible to us a greater affection for the truth than for their preferred outcomes. Because if we're in a giant game of let's all manipulate each other, which is I think the human condition, absolutely any time you've got a platform that people start to believe in, the people around it have this incredible incentive to like, hey, let's hijack that reputation and pump our coin. Or fill in the blank, Victor.
Yes, actually, I think this touches upon the questions that I had posted in the chat, and also my goodbye actually to this session, because I've got to go to another meeting where I still have to prepare like a few minutes. So yeah, my questions were, and I think it connects very well to that. Are there fundamental epistemological or sociological limits to good data and consensus on facts? How is reliable knowledge being produced? And indeed, like what do the institutions and practices like science or journalism look like under decentralized datafied governance? Those are my questions. So with that, yeah, I'm giving that to you and saying goodbye.
Awesome, Victor. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
See you next time.
Very good. Michael, you were going to say something.
What do institutions and practices science journalism look like under? They look like the wise monkeys. They hear nothing, they see nothing, they speak nothing.
Right.
What were you saying about the wise monkeys?
That our institutions become like the wise monkeys of our time.
There's certainly, I would be shocked if anyone in, let's say, climate science were to even put forward a request for a grant that would question certain perceived truths. Like I could probably put in a grant to question the speed of light or question Planck's constant, or I see a reason to doubt some fact that has no particular political significance, and if I had a plausible case, I might get my grant. But if I wanted to check the accuracy or cast doubt upon, heaven forbid, the most catastrophic possible interpretation of climate science, not only would I have my grant refused, but I would likely lose my tenure, lose my position, get blackballed. And I'm aware of at least one online list that's maintained whose purpose is to blackball scientists who are insufficiently fervent in their support of the currently dominant view that the climate is in grave peril and we must mobilize all people with as much exaggeration as possible to some sort of collective action, because otherwise we're all doomed, I say. And so blackballing scientists based on their belief system isn't science. I'm not saying it's wise or foolish, but it's not science.
Well, I mean, I think that, I mean, one of the things that you said, I would, again, these are, I think, are structural problems rather than like some kind of default state. Like you were saying how we've gotten into the system where like we're bullshitting one another knowingly, like when I say bullshit, it's like, no, I know that I'm saying an untruth, which is different than, right?
Oh,
So
no.
wait.
People lie to themselves first. I can
I might be
persuade you much more
I might be
plausibly.
bullshitting. Yeah, I might be bullshitting myself, but we're in the system of bullshitting one another and bullshitting ourselves for our own benefit, right? Over the others. And that is not the natural state of humankind. That is the imposed state of a broken system. And we've talked about this great Ponzi scheme that we're in an unsustainable system. Like our fundamental economics don't work. You know, a lot of these kinds of things that we've been propagating as truths are not truth. It's rivalrous, as Michael said, like it's one against the other. And in that state, it makes sense to lie to each other, but that is not the natural state at all. The natural state is that if you go around doing that, the tiger is going to eat somebody, because we're all like, no, the tiger's not over there, because we're thinking, oh, well, if the tiger eats my neighbor instead of me, then that's good for me. We didn't, that's not a natural state for a herd animal. A herd animal,
maybe.
which is what we are, our natural state, the survival state is collaborative. And
yes and no. Yes and no. The survival state for the group is collaboration, and a dominant strategy most of the time for most individuals is cooperative. And yet, you will find, I predict, I would claim that if you look both at animal and human models, you'd see that small groups cooperating with each other inside the context of the larger group advance both that small group and the members in it, and occasionally at the expense of the larger group. But hey, if everybody else is worse off, but I'm better off and my team is better off and we're not caught, how is that bad for me? You know, if people would rather be king of the ashes than, you know, a knave of a thriving metropolis in some cases. People aren't particularly, you know, rational in the way we would like them to be. I can think of a couple of examples, but I don't want to dominate the conversation.
I think those are structural. I think that's the way we've built the system. I don't think other species particularly operate that way, and I don't think.
Oh, I can find you animal models that would
there are some. I'm not saying there aren't. I'm just saying that is not a natural state. It is a structured.
And is nature equals virtuous, or nature equals desirable, or because botulism is natural.
There's nothing wrong with botulism, and there's nothing wrong with extinction. But
I'll quote you later.
No, there really isn't. It's nothing wrong with a virus. There's nothing wrong about a virus. It's just an organism trying to survive, and you can quote me on that. Organisms are out there trying to survive. But I would say instead that in some cases, the existential requirement, like my good on this planet, is going to depend on whether, as kind of humanity, we start cooperating at a higher level. I actually think that my long-term survival has shifted from this rivalrous nature. Well, it's just, if it's good enough for me, it's good. I think that we're at a stage where that's no longer going to pass. Like, it's just going to be terminal, which again, nothing wrong if we wipe out all the people on the planet. That's not good or bad. It's just, you know, if we cease to exist.
It's bad.
Michael has a subjective opinion.
That's a human-centric view. I mean, the dinosaurs went into extinction. We could be extinct. That could be good or bad. I'm just saying it's neutral from a nature point of view. From my point of view, it sucks, but you know, I'm going to die pretty soon. And what does it matter to me if 20 years from now I die anyhow? And everybody, I don't consider it good or bad.
Well, I found my attitudes to that shifting very strongly when I moved from being a parent to being a grandparent.
Interesting. Say more, Michael.
As a parent, my responsibility was get these buggers out of here, and they're not my department anymore, you know.
The kids have moved out. Huzzah, huzzah.
May the dog be dead, you know. So, but then they start having these grandchildren things, and geez, that's different. And so
Okay.
this continuity of self to other survives parenthood, perhaps. But I totally agree with Gracie's point that this is something we have done to ourselves. This is human engineering has created systemic patterns that drive us towards systemic competition. We number one wins, you know, look after yourself. Even our attitudes towards group behavior are self-interested again. I will do better in a group that is doing better. So we sort of still keep looking at expedience rather than functionality.
Right. And to
Which
what extent
brings
are
us
any of
back
us
to what is
systems
it-
designers, let alone conscious systems designers, let alone designers of systems that withstand the test of time? Because I promise you, every
whoever does what
failed
they say.
system.
Martin.
And who does what they say anyway?
Sorry.
He's saying, who among us is system designers?
Oh, I didn't respond to that because I've self-attested to something else, and it's a negative attestation to my own capability of systems design or something. Yeah, I can design and do some things. I don't wear that label.
Can I offer an intervention here that the consideration of Dunbar's number and murmuration.
Previewing next week. Excellent. Well done.
It would be just a little shift to consider. Murmuration is based on very, very simple, very close, not too close, not too far. You can only accommodate so many other birds in that context. I'm only
Yes, like
aware
2 or
of
3 variables that predict flocking and murmuration behavior, right?
And the individual in the murmuration is only aware of a little bit of it.
A dramatically
and we
shrunk
talk about
context,
Dunbar's
yeah.
number as though, yeah, but in a massive flock, of course, it's murmurations of murmurations.
Right.
There's proximities of proximities. There's this breathingness of little clusters that are themselves breathing on their own spacing and movement. And that's where I see this confusion of what do we know, where's the reality, how does it matter, what does it affect what I do? Ultimately, it comes down to what do we do anyway? And is my murmuration in my little township on the edge of wherever governed by what I've read from theorists in this part of the world, activists in the other? Not so much as it's governed by what my local neighborhood hears and believes. I got to murmur locally before I'm going to be in part of a murmur of murmurs.
Right. Occupy Wall Street comes
So
after some prior something.
It comes with local. Doing. It comes with doing, and doing, when it comes down to it, is always very personal, very present.
Right. I'm noticing that Michal, Ruben have both been camera off and mic off, and I'm wondering if either of them wanted to weigh in at this point. And
yeah, I'm actually going across Martin's what do you call it? The theories and laws that he was sharing. Just kind of was reading through them.
Brahan's law and
yeah,
Jones.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. What did you say?
In the chat, he's following up on Brahan's law and Reed's law, which are two things that.
Yeah, exactly.
So, sorry, if I may just jump in there since I jumped in on the chat. Yes, it's simply because it's an active, something I'm going to be and started making personal contacts with, just to understand the cultural context of where I happen to be sitting, talking today on the one hand, so it kind of matters and I can do something about it here. But it's very interesting in the face of it's a decentralized, as it were, system of people. And I just wonder to what extent that connects with perhaps what foundationally are fairly simple sort of, yes, laws, as it were, around murmuration, because yes, there was a sort of a breakdown there, but it was highly resilient, so arguably over millennia, and it withstood wave after wave of violent colonial invasion and colonization, and for centuries. And is the term, you know, it's where the term "beyond the pale" comes from. Dublin's English, Anglo, whatever, and everything else is beyond the pale to the west, where the colonizers became Bretonized. They fitted in with the decentralized sort of system that was there. So that's a reflection I have on this, is what patterns were in place at a local context, local level, which must have been adaptive throughout the land, which is different in mountainous areas and so on and so forth.
Right.
Yet had some national scale, you know, population scale cohesion, just to sort of emphasize the point that Michael, I think, is bringing forward, and perhaps Grace, at, you know, it can be that you can have patterns that operate at a, you know, statements about everybody's related to an Irish king is kind of true, because you were king of something very sort of limited in scope. But in fact, you know, so you had these sort of rings of rings, which seem to survive over a very long period, and is as old as anything written down in Sanskrit in recorded history. So this is very interesting to me, and I've bumped into a bunch of people just locally who talk about Brehon law being just under the surface, and they're talking about it in this current context. So this is why it has resonance right now. You know, how to kind of get by in that way.
I'm being called into another meeting, so I'm going to relinquish my moderator hat to Michael Linton. I dub I'm tagging you in as moderator, because it would be too easy to just fall back on Grace, and that's not fair to her.
I also
Hey guys,
think
I also
that
have
I wanted to check if we cut off Ruben, because I wasn't sure if Martin cut him off or he had more to say.
Oh, I'm sorry,
no.
Ruben in on YouTube or wherever this DTube, if this, yeah.
Can I just impose to thank Thomas for passing the baton? We're off. Thank you very much. Brilliant stuff.
I'm hopping off too, guys. Great meeting everyone. I'll see you in the next one.
Thank you,
guys.
Cheers. Kevin.
And now for something completely different. It's going to be fairly free form from here. I have no capacity to operate at that level, so let the games roll. Carry on. I'll throw out a complaint if I think the process is getting weird, but I just think we're
okay.
I just want to say, so I'm, organizing these Kiko Lab sense-making exercises in multiple languages now. And I would love to say I have a sophisticated methodology, but actually, I'm just making it up as I go along, because I don't actually know, how do you sense make and then synthesize in different languages at the same time? So I'm holding them in an easy format, and then my idea is to use Neuro to then combine a bunch of boards and just have multilingual speakers play around with all the different kind of quotes and see if we can come up with the groupings of ideas that go kind of across languages, and then use the groupings that are of similar ideas to help define like help make those into a firm molecule of a great idea. Now, this is complete like theory, so that could just be hogwash. I don't know if it's going to work like that. That's kind of like how I'm approaching it.
I mean, I think that's an important question. And, you know, how do we make sense of stuff? Like, let's say we do have all this stuff and all this information from all these perspectives. How do we make sense of it? I think that's a great question. Yeah, maybe Lauren can repost the link because it looks like some people are having trouble reaching it. But you know, for me, there's a question of again, when we're talking about governance, right? I think that your sense-making group isn't sharp necessarily on what it is we're governing and what are the problem definitions. So you could make sense, right? So if the question is how do we make sense of stuff, then you're creating ideas about how do we make sense of stuff. And then some of those would be proposals like, this is one way we could make sense of stuff, and this is another way we could make sense of stuff. And then we might take one of those proposals and try it out. Is that working for making sense of stuff? But then you would want to apply it to a real problem. Okay, we've got this complex problem. We're going to try this methodology that the Geeko Labs created. And then with that methodology, see if the group comes to a sense making together as a group. So, I mean, that's how I would see it. You're a little bit meta, but it's still, it's meta for a purpose. It's like, we're going to try and create a methodology for sense making, and then we're going to try and apply the methodology somewhere. And I think that
yeah,
is,
I'm trying to actually bring it from meta to actually like just doing it and just actually like sense making kind of on the ground.
well, then you have to find ground. But this is what, like, that's kind of my next point is like, you know, I tend to be coming up from the other end. I'm like, okay, let's take some actual people in an actual community and do stuff. And I mean, Michael and I think Ruben's the only one who's not also on the in the course. But so, you know, we've been taking that as our community, right? Let's say we've got this community of people who are loosely associated with this group, right? We'll say, you know, Michael's got his group of people who are doing complementary currencies, and Martin's got sort of the Hollow community, and Lauren, you've got your Kiko community, and I've got my course community, and then Ruben is involved with the DGov and the Common Stack or whatever. Sorry?
Caribbean Blockchain Network.
With
the Caribbean Blockchain Network.
Oh, the Caribbean Blockchain Network. And let's say we're loosely this kind of distributed governance, you know, crypto community, right? So let's take that community and say, how do we decide something for ourselves, right? What do we want to decide? And like this week, just deciding on whether to use Telegram or Signal was like, you know, we don't have a decision-making process, you know, it's vote with your feet. It's like this crazy thing. So, you know, the simple decisions, I mean, sometimes the simple decisions are the hard ones. I mean, like in this group, for example, on this call, we just decided that the decision-making process is every proposal is accepted unless there's any opposition to it. And that's why this is now a collaboration between DGov and Common Stack, not, you know, and we saw more Common Stack people coming in this week as a result of that decision that nobody opposed. There's just, I said, hey, let's try this. And everybody's like, yep, sounds all right. So that's our only decision-making system right now, is like whatever somebody says and nobody opposes.
Which isn't a bad indication of the sort of murmuration protocol.
Principled objection, yeah.
Yeah, adjacent possible. Like,
you know,
where can we move to from here and do people feel comfortable or uncomfortable? And they will feed back. So there's the avoidance of rule structures to proceed with this sort of thing is pretty important. Otherwise, you end up with something like Robert's Rules of Order with a different wrapping on it. Sociocracy is brilliant. It can very quickly become
bureaucracy. Just plain
a form of control. Yeah.
Just plain bureaucracy.
And then there's the tyranny of structurelessness. That's old from the early 60s, I think it was. You can't not have steering, but who and how and to what effect. And one of the ideas about indigenous communities in North America was variable leadership according to context. You know, and this you keep finding time and time again is it's not about role ownership, it's about role process. Who takes on what role? You know, it's what are we doing, not what's the score.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that is striking to me, just kind of going back to the topic of news and information, is the sense making and the wisdom of the sense making, and that kind of what seems important is first of all creating systems in which sense making is encouraged and people see examples of good sense making. So like I was talking, good and bad, right? You know, and education for sense making, and then really trusting, I mean, the trusting individuals to be able to make sense of what they're seeing, and having, and I think that I think it's not just, you know, if I look at when we're talking before about mistrust in the media, there's mistrust in one another too. Like, how are those uneducated people gonna know anything? Or how are those people who, you know, native people who live in the jungle gonna know anything? Or how are, you know, this mistrust of one another? Well, what if we give people, I mean, this is sort of blue church stuff, right? The whole WHO is like, what if we give people access to data and everything? All the dumb people down there, we got to tell them because they're gonna, you know, like, so, and we mistrust one another as well. And so I think that when we start to think about decentralized systems, we have to be willing to kind of take this leap and say, I'm going to have to trust people that, first of all, have totally different knowledge bases than I do. Probably some of them aren't trained in sense making, and some of them really will have an adversarial relationship with me. But trusting that as a collective, there's no other way to pull ourselves out of the mess than to say, I'm willing to create a decentralized system and put certain parameters around it, like so that we don't get chat bots, you know, that hate each other, and that we say, okay, well, certain kinds of behaviors are not acceptable, but within these parameters that, and, you know, allowing ourselves to trust one another again. And like, this is what I'm seeing here. Here's an actual picture of it from my hometown. Yeah.
So one of the, oh, thank you, Michael. So one of the things we learned about sense making and innovation in collective intelligence is that this comes from June Hawley, who's a network weaver. And she says that it's really important to get information from the edges, because that's where innovation happens. So one of the things I think is really important in the sense-making community, because it's really like dominated by the thoughts of certain people who are super smart, but these people may be like, you know, like Harvard educated and white and male, and, you know, they're super, you know, maybe slick or educated, but these ideas can kind of like, it can kind of be like a silo. So what I'm trying to do is, you know, like structure these talks where you can actually have, that's why I'm doing it and say like easy Spanish or easy Portuguese. So indigenous people who may speak Spanish or Portuguese as a second language can come in, and we can bring people who are really like far from the edges, whose voices are not actually heard in our community, to help like make sense and kind of like frame, you know, how we're doing things.
If I may just refer to the Fed Wiki, as a potential vehicle for this sort of small content in volume, multiple versions, multiple languages, so that you build a coherence between these versions of the same truth. So I'm very interested in this propagated out in simple but coherent modules, and particularly with the translation into different languages. That's very much like the holochain business of ledgers. They intersect.
Mm-hmm.
And with multiple translations of core materials, you can increase the intersection of integration across different cultures, different languages.
Oh, Michael, that's a great idea. Maybe I can get together with Ward and do like a training session for these like multilingual people.
And Stacko, Tromsø.
Okay. Okay.
I think got that right, with the Guerrilla Collective.
Yeah, I already reached out to him. He didn't get back to me yet.
He's very busy, but
okay.
Basically they've got the model.
Oh yeah.
Collaborative, fee-based process, but cooperative fee-based systems, and I think that and FedWiki could lead to an awful lot of.
Thank you. Yeah, great.
Well, thank you. I think
I know I misspelled all of those references, but okay.
Yeah, the Miro is amazing, and I'm fascinated by your evolving mastery thereof. But it does have a boundary edges, and it's difficult for people to engage with that one with its fluidity. It's so powerful. Sometimes you want things that are nice and atomic.
Yeah, I also think so. I believe in what my fantasy is to have a bunch of people learning different tools, because that's the thing. I don't think everyone needs to go on Miro. I like it because I'm super visual. But like what I'm trying to do too is arrange sessions where you have a variety of people, do like professionals who do this for a living. So like Jerry Mikulski is like a professional mapper of like brain mapper, and have like a Twitch person there who can Twitch on the fly. Basically you can clip out like videos. Yeah, you can clip out videos live while you're doing stuff and it's already done. And so I'd love to have like a variety of people making artifacts on the fly, like real time during a call, to see what becomes of that. Because I honestly feel like there's so many meetings and a lot of like important stuff gets discussed, but it's not just the importance of discussing it, it's the importance of telling the story and figuring out ways of capturing the story and broadcasting it. So I'm really seeing like digital media playing a critical role in the future. Up until now, it's just been like brand identity, and you use art and digital media to express your brand, which is totally inauthentic and ridiculous, especially after COVID. Like, it's done. Like, this inauthentic like BS is just like, yeah.
Thank you.
So I would like to say that go ahead.
Can I just, Martin had the hand.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, I just want to quickly chip in there to say I personally agree with you, Lauren, and fantastic. But if you're a brand identity person with a budget, it's far from BS, isn't it? Sorry, if you one is as the role of. That's all. So
no, I'm saying
with you.
There's a role for brand identity people. I'm saying, but it's being, I think, okay, this is just totally, I'm pulling this out of my ass just to, among friends. But I really do feel like these like storytellers of the brand, like this is going to be refashioned into intra-network communication, because right now companies have no clue what's happening in like different countries, or like they're so big now and they have like no sense making. They just have endless meetings and very little communication.
Absolutely true. And you too, Martin, right? You nailed that one. Grace.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that when thinking about what you were offering with, like, I'd like to, you know, like you're saying, I'd like to have a situation where during a conversation, we're populating this board with different stories. I think you would have to have a specific meeting structure for that. Like, we're going to have, you know, every 5 minutes a break, because I can't type notes and listen at the same time. I can't. And I definitely can't go looking for some image online or some link online and listen to you at the same time. So I think that there would be a certain type of meeting and investigation in which you would want to create those artifacts. And then a certain way you would want to structure that meeting. And I'm not sure exactly what it is, but that would be an interesting experiment to do, even on these calls, saying, okay, this call, we're going to do this thing. We're going to do a round robin, or we're going to have two people have a little debate between them. Here's the topic, right? And then, like, for example, like the way Thomas did it, we could do exactly that, right? What are the questions that come up on this topic? Now, all right, given that's Martin's topic, who wants to debate him? We're going to give you 5 minutes on the timer. We're going to have them debate. We're all going to listen carefully and intently to the debate. And then we're all going to go to the Miro board and put in whatever comes up for us. I think that would be like a lot of fun, and to try it. And then next week, try some other thing. Because otherwise it's like I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. Martin.
Yeah, thanks. I'm also wondering, some of this stuff, as the situation you just described, which is an active synchronous participation that's recorded, so that the meeting itself, the synchronous activity, is part of, it's integral to the process, and some of it can be done not within the meeting. There's a lot of mapping which can be done off recordings, and so I just coming back to this point about, you know, do you have to structure a meeting to do the stuff that doesn't need to be synchronous? Well, no, I don't think so. There's a sort of a longer life, isn't there, to a meeting, where it goes through an archival, and in order to make it relevant, it then has a sort of production. It goes into a production cycle, the role of the archive producer.
In order to make it relevant.
Yes, in order to make it relevant, to keep it.
And that is the key point, surely.
Yeah,
and
I believe so.
The return to Lauren's proposition that curation on the fly, Twitch, fly, you know, catching and whatever. And as we've all found, Grace has referred to it many times, doing three things at once is hard. And I really think we restrict the creativity of our meeting if we both try and meet and curate at the same time. What we actually are going to have to get is a sort of goldfish bowl process here, where the inner group is cooking. Go for it. There are curators, observers, commenters, documenters in sort of concentric for the topology, but obviously it's space, it's time, it's connectivity. We have all the tools to do this, particularly with the Twitch, particularly with things like Otter and Team Function. So it's like you used to say Wayne Gretzky should not be driving the Zamboni. Like, you shouldn't be selling hot dogs. You take the talent and you process at their talent level. You induct curators, supporters, translators, documenters, cross-linkers, critics.
What does that mean, Michael, you induct?
You make it worth the while to join the boat. And
oh, thank you.
Do it.
I
think you got to pay them to make it work.
At this point, but it's, yeah, and you would have to pay people like that are in the meeting to go afterwards and spend more time on it or whatever. You know, there's some people who are better at that. Listen, you just ask Lauren, how many people have gone into that Miro board and added to it in between?
Like almost none.
right? So you would have to create, like, she would either have to run after people, you know, coerce them, beg them, pay them. So yes, you do, right? Like
Okay,
that's,
yes, I agree. We are agreeing on this, by the way.
yeah. So the question, so I would say that this is how I would say this right now. I have no principled objection to trying a proposal where we have some special structures to stop every few minutes. I have no principled objection to trying Michael's methodologies. He mentioned a number of tools. I have no principled objections to trying any of these things. We could also have a 1 hour meeting and a half-hour curation. I have no principled objections to trying out all these things.
Mm-hmm.
So you've all made proposals that I think we should try.
I have another proposal I'd love to try.
Okay, good. We have 3 minutes left. So
Okay. So I've been working on a peer production methodology for deep profiles, and where you go around the room and say what you like and appreciate about another person. So you start with one person, everyone takes their turn, and then you go to the next person. Then I clip those into videos, and then we would put those on the Neuro board. So my hypothesis is that this is a way of building reputation, and it's not the kind of reputation of like, is Grace qualified to do this, yes or no? It's more like, these are observations that we have seen from a variety of perspectives, that this person knows about this, or like consistently comments or makes like good contributions around this thing. So it's totally positive, but I think that it can really help us become smarter as a group, and that people who come in and look around, they can have these profiles to quickly orient themselves and know who knows what about what.
So how does that relate to, for instance, the chart that Thomas published earlier in this conversation?
I do not understand that chart, so I do not know.
I don't want to go too far over time.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to say that I do have a principled objection to that proposal. I just think
Mm-hmm.
it's beyond the scope of what we're doing right now.
Okay.
And it really belongs in the scope of what you're doing right now. And I would like to see that work somewhere else before we bring it in here. There's
Okay.
a lot of potential negative consequences, and there's a lot of bullshit capability. Like, there's people on these calls that, you know, I might not, you know, I might have some positive, I might have some negative to say about them. And I, you know, I might not agree with some of them. I might think some of them are, I mean, I just think there's too many potential negative consequences for me to want to try that before it's been adopted elsewhere. So that would be my principled objection to that.
Okay.
I want to see that tried elsewhere.
I think it's interesting that this conversation is oscillating between conversations about possibility and the general context, and issues about actual opportunity and function. Grace is taking this to the point of, you know, what shall we do, and making the point that we're not going to do this until it's, but I think both Lauren, myself are talking about, gee, wouldn't it be interesting if, now we're not proposing it as right here, right now, but we certainly, I think, would agree with it needs to be played with. That's my feeling about this. I think it's been a very interesting thing.
Is that what you meant, Lauren? Is that like, this is just an idea, or that I want to try it here? I just want to check that.
No, I was wondering if you wanted to try it here, but I don't mind.
Yeah,
I'll show you. I've actually done it, so I'm going to show you, and I can actually, maybe what I can do is present what that looks like to have group profiles, and we can just look at it for a few minutes, and then people will know what that's like without doing it.
I think we should do that during our next revisiting of the issue of reputation, like not as, because that's a rabbit hole. So I would love to do that during a upcoming discussion of other forms of reputation.
Okay.
Okay.
That makes sense. Yeah.
All right, cool. Thanks, everybody. Another amazing conversation with amazing people.
This was great. This is like my favorite conversation.
Oh, yay. I'm so
Yeah.
glad.
Yeah.
I mean, that's as much a compliment to everybody else as me. I mean, it's very integrative. So thanks, guys. And we'll see you again next week.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Grace.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.